Howdy, and welcome to another episode of Untold Tales from this side of nowhere. It is Saturday morning, and it is time for your favorite podcast once again. This week, I'm recording from Montana, and I'm up in the Medicine Lodge Mountains at the Hildreth Cabin. So, shout out to Grandpa Hildreth and all the Hildreth family. I'm recording in the bunkhouse. Well, I guess this is the boys' dorm. And it's a good place to record another story about living in just about as close as you can get to the middle of nowhere, and that's Poverty Flats, Wyoming. Before we get started, here's a couple messages from our sponsor. The podcast is sponsored by the Copper Corner Cafe. The Copper Corner is located in Basin, Wyoming, is open for breakfast, lunch, and dinner Friday and Saturday from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Thursday, the Copper Corner is open for breakfast and lunch from 7 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. Stop by and try any of their delicious menu items featuring homemade bread. Ooh, that's delicious. For all sandwiches, and of course, their famous pie for dessert. Breakfast is served all day, so come on in to the Copper Corner Cafe. Out here in Poverty Flats, if your machine breaks down halfway to nowhere, you're in for a long walk home. That's why I've been using Lookover Power Sports, a handy little app that helps you track maintenance and set reminders, even with a photo right from the trail. It works for dirt bikes, side-by-sides, snowmobiles, and just about anything with a motor. You can try it free for a month, and it's 50% off until Labor Day. Start by visiting lookover.app, because breakdowns make bad stories, unless they're someone else's. We are also sponsored by the Wyoming Welcome Program. The Wyoming Welcome Program offers two services to local businesses: Table Talk and the Wyoming Welcome Baskets. Wyoming Welcome Baskets are filled with promotional items for local businesses and distributed to new move-ins to the Bighorn Basin. Table Talk brochures include jokes, facts about the state of Wyoming, the month's holidays, and advertisements from our local businesses. These brochures are placed on restaurant tables in Cody and Powell for diners to peruse. So if you'd like to get your business name out there, please contact the folks at the Wyoming Welcome Program by shooting an email to Haley J, that's HALEYJ, at wyomingwelcome.com. And now, the podcast. Well, it is August now. Hard to believe that final month of summer. And I've already been getting letters and emails from school, and I'm not ready to go back yet, but I guess I have a couple of weeks to wrap my head around it. But summer is, in fact, winding down. I have family in Arizona who actually had their first day back to school yesterday. So if you happen to live somewhere where you're unfortunate enough to have to go back to school in July, I feel for you. I really do. I think that Memorial Day to Labor Day ought to be summer. And folks in Powell agree with me quite a bit, but the state has a requirement for the number of days you have to be in school, and you have to meet those requirements. So we usually have students back around the 21st of August, and then we're finished right around the last day of May, which is fine by me. It's a good summer, but it's always hard when it comes to an end. Anyways, today's story is like the summer that never ends. It is too good to be true, and that is the title of today's story. Too good to be true. Here goes. Whoever chopped down all these trees should be punched unceremoniously and repeatedly in the face, I grumbled between gasping breaths as I heaved myself over yet another downed lodgepole pine. Then a thought struck me. Whoever had cut down this many trees was either a big beefy lumberjack or part of a log-cutting crew of considerable size, and therefore had friends who were big beefy lumberjacks. I immediately reconsidered my previous statement. Well, maybe not repeatedly, but they should get punched at least once. I was at my summer job, which I normally loved, but today's hike to find noxious weeds in the Bighorn Mountains was especially punishing. The task was made more difficult by the fact I was wearing a heavy backpack, and the effort of pulling myself and the pack over the downed trees for the past half hour was killing me. Sweat coursed down my face and soaked my shirt. Between trees, I would pause, panting, and survey the course before me, wondering when the sea of oversized pickup sticks would ever end. "Geez, this sucks," I groaned. Then, like a blast from the past, the scene before me flickered, and in my mind's eye I could see another pile of downed trees, and on top of this one, a group of men and boys scrabbling along, their oversized packs strapped to their backs. A voice from years ago drifted over the mess of felled trees. "Come on, Gus," Dad hollered, and the dog, a Beagle Basset cross, surveyed the trees above him with perpetually doleful eyes. "You can do it," Dad encouraged, but Gus didn't look so sure. "Remind me why we're climbing over this mess?" Fred complained as he pulled himself up onto a log so covered in branches it looked like some kind of enormous poisonous caterpillar. "We're going to find Lost Lake," Scoutmaster Eli Lyman grunted, trying and failing to swing a leg over a log that lay at waist height in front of him. "Yeah, I can see why it got lost," my buddy Marty Flincherton grumbled as he watched Eli try unsuccessfully to climb onto the log for the third time. We had been up since 5 o'clock that morning, having risen at dawn so we could drive up to the Bighorns to get an early start. By the time we hit the trailhead, it was about 8 in the morning, and we had begun with all the enthusiasm that usually accompanies an overnight campout. I don't remember whose idea it was to hike to Lost Lake, but I would really like to know. I do remember Dad pointing it out on the map and showing us the trail that led to the alpine body of water. "There it is," he told us, his finger resting on the small blue outline. "Lost Lake. And here's the trail. I've never been to this one. Must be why it's called Lost Lake." As it turned out, the trail was a hardly visible ribbon of dirt patches with grass growing in the path and tree branches hanging down over it. That probably should have been our first warning sign. But then again, the men and boys of Troop 41 never did have too close of a relationship with trails. We weren't opposed to the occasional cross-country trek, and this hike began much like our other overnight campouts. There was joking and singing and the usual exchange of friendly banter, but then things took a turn for the worse. We had just come up a fairly steep pole, and Eli was encouraging us with his usual inspirational speech. "Come on, boys," Eli panted. "Just one more ridge. One more ridge, and then it'll be all downhill to the lake." Having heard Eli's lies plenty of times, we all groaned and continued trudging up the hill. Thankfully, I had hidden several items from my pack in my twin brother Fred's bag during our rest stops, so the hike wasn't as bad as it could have been. "Geez, I must be getting out of shape," Fred huffed when we finally crested the ridge. "I wonder why this feels so much harder than the last hike." "Beats me," I sniffed, looking off in the distance. "Which direction did you say the lake is?" I asked, eager to change the subject. That-a-way, Eli said, indicating a direction with a knobby finger. You mean through all that down timber? Marty said, suddenly incredulous. We're going to have to crawl through all of that? Well, let me check, Eli said, squinting dubiously toward the timber Marty had indicated. The scoutmaster unclipped his GPS from his belt and squinted at the little screen. Let's see, he grunted. Holding the GPS in one hand and turning in a full circle before stopping, he declared, That's the way to the lake. He looked up from the screen to see what direction he was facing. Gall darn, he muttered, surveying the downed timber ahead of him. I guess it does go through all that downed timber. No more ridges, though, he quipped, trying to sound cheerful. Anyone bring a chainsaw? My cousin Nick asked. I don't think so, Dad said, his jaw set and a determined look on his face. We'll be all right, though. We've done tougher hikes than this. If I were to write a book on famous last words, that might be the title. Almost from the beginning, the downed trees made for a punishing, miserable scramble. Getting over the first log across the trail wasn't so bad, but the 4-foot drop on the other side compensated for that. In turn, each man and boy heaved himself over the log and lowered himself back down, only to turn around and find himself face to face with another tree. The dog crawled under what he could, but Dad ended up heaving him up on top of several trees and then coaxing him along them until he could safely clamber to the ground again. Trying to balance on top of the logs was almost as dangerous as crawling over them was physically demanding. One misstep, and you would plummet to the ground, or worse, onto the top of another tree with hundreds of broken branches sticking up like skewers, waiting for a chunk of meat. For the first hour or so, we made good progress. That is, if going about 100 yards every 15 minutes can be considered good progress. Given that the lake still lay 2 miles away, we were starting to wonder if we would ever make it to Lost Lake. I think we should just leave Lost Lake like it is. Lost, I hollered, slumping against a downed tree. In all directions, the ground was strewn with piles of fallen trees. In some places, the stacks were 3 or 4 trees deep, and some of the trees were laying at chest height. I had never seen so much downed timber in my life, and the prospect of doing another hour or 2 of the punishing exercise made my knees shake even worse than they already were. Marty's face was bright red, and his shirt was soaked in sweat. One leg of Cousin Nick's jeans was badly torn, having snagged on a branch when he dropped from the top of a log. Fred and I, normally talkative, had fallen quiet, except for our labored breathing. Dad and the dog looked spent. Only Eli was seemingly unperturbed, though he was definitely perspiring and sucking in big gulps of mountain air. Let's take a breather, he huffed, sinking down on top of one of the many fallen trees. What could possibly have knocked down so many trees? Marty complained. It must have been a microburst, Dad suggested. The pine beetles kill the trees, and then a concentrated wind gust comes through and knocks them down. Well, I think that knocking down this many trees should be illegal, Nick quipped. This is a nightmare. For a moment, we all looked around us at the trees, contemplating the task that still lay ahead of us. It wasn't a cheery prospect, to say the least. Now, boys, Eli said, a sly grin slowly spreading across his face. Just you wait. This hike will be worth it in the end. He paused for effect to make sure we were all listening, then continued. There'll be a bunch of girls camped out there when we get to Lost Lake. For a moment, everyone just sat in silence, wondering at the preposterous statement Eli had just made. Then Nick snorted. In a moment, everyone was laughing. Eli was legendary for telling tall tales, but this one took the cake. All this climbing has made you crazy, Eli, Fred wheezed through a fit of laughter. There won't be any girls at Lost Lake, Marty said. Can you imagine a bunch of girls climbing over this? Even Dad was grinning and shaking his head at Eli's statement. No, I'm serious, Eli said matter-of-factly as the laughter died down. There'll be a whole mess of girls up there. Good-looking ones, too. Just you wait. All these downed trees are messing with your head, Eli, I said as I slowly straightened up again. It was getting harder and harder to do. Hey, how did all your food get into my pack? Fred suddenly burst out. His pack was open beside him, and there on top sat a huge Ziploc bag full of food. The name Al was scrawled across it in black Sharpie. Looks like it's time to get going again, I said quickly, and turned to climb the next log. Not so fast, bucko, Fred growled, grabbing my pack and pulling me back. The next hour or so wasn't so bad. Carrying all of Fred's food for the rest of the hike wasn't the worst thing that could have happened, I guess. I could have been Gus, who had become so exhausted Dad had to start carrying him. I mean, when you're only about 18 inches tall, some things are just harder for you, and climbing over downed timber is one of those things. I've done harder hikes than the Lost Lake hike, but I can't remember when. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we reached a point where we couldn't see any more downed trees. Look, Marty said, pointing. It's the edge of the downed timber. We're saved. Would you look at that? Dad said, shifting Gus in his arms. We're almost out. By the time we finally reached the edge of the downed timber, everyone was completely tuckered out. That being said, the relief we experienced from finally emerging from the fallen trees was enough to propel us the final mile or so to the lake. The trail was still very faint at this point, but it might as well have been the interstate after what we had just endured. In total, we were climbing over trees for at least 2 hours, but it felt like 10. As it was late in the afternoon when we finally came around a bend and saw our first glimpse of the lake through a gap in the trees. Hey, I think that's it, I cried, detecting the glimmer of water through the opening in the timber. That must be Lost Lake. In spite of our exhaustion, we picked up the pace, our packs bouncing as we double-timed it toward the lake. As the trees opened up, we could see crystal clear water fringed by boulders and grass, with trees standing guard all around the edge of the lake. A large clearing on our side of the lake offered a great place to camp, and we could just make out the far side in the distance. It's not lost anymore, Fred said proudly, standing at the water's edge. He was still panting slightly, and his shirt was drenched in sweat, but there was a broad grin on his face. Yep, this is it, Dad said, consulting his GPS. Lost Lake. I never thought we'd make it, my cousin Nick exclaimed. That was the longest hike of my entire life. I don't know how anyone gets here. This must be the hardest lake to get to in all of the Bighorns. Yeah, and Eli said there would be girls here, I scoffed. Just then, a sound I never imagined in all my wildest dreams to hear in that remote location drifted across the water. What was that? Fred asked. Shh, I hushed him. There it is again. We all stood in silence, straining our ears. Is that? Marty began. No, it can't be, Nick gasped. But it was. The sound that drifted across the water was the sound of voices and laughter. And not just any voices and laughter. It was the sound of human voices and laughter, and not just any humans. These were of the female variety. We were sure of it. No freaking way, Nick said, pointing at the far side of the lake. There in the water was a group of 4 or 5 girls splashing and laughing. For a moment, we stood in utter disbelief. My jaw was hanging low enough a bird could have flown into my mouth. Possibly a pterodactyl. Thud. Marty's pack hit the ground, and he began tearing frantically at the buckle on top of his bag. We turned to watch as he flung his possessions onto the ground behind him. He pawed frantically through his pack like a dog digging a hole, and finally emerged with a black cylindrical object. He gave the can of Axe a body spray, a few quick shakes, and began spraying. Shh, shh, went the aerosol can as Marty sprayed cheap cologne onto his sweaty armpits. For good measure, he took one more pass over his head and shoulders, and then tossed the can back into his pack. You gotta be kidding me, Dad said. You brought a can of Axe on a scout campout? Marty shrugged. Be prepared. He sniffed, then headed off around the lake. Just where do you think you're going? Eli said, collaring Marty and holding him at arm's length, a look of disgust on his face. You know, just to see the sights, Marty shrugged. I don't think so, Marty grinned. We need to set up camp. As we pitched our tents, Eli was insufferable. I told you boys there would be girls at this here lake, he said, sliding together sections of a tent pole. How could you possibly have known, I asked, stealing a glance toward the other side of the lake. I just knew it, Eli shrugged, with a smug look on his face. The girls must have seen us by now, but they didn't seem to take much heed. The lake was at least 80 yards across, and we were setting up camp back from the water, so in the failing light the girls were only dimly visible on the other side of the lake. A group of about 10 or 12 of them frolicked in the water and laughed at the lakeside. Dad shook his head in disbelief for at least the 10th time that evening. I still don't get it either, he said. Never in a million years would I have thought there would be girls here. They definitely didn't come in the way we came. There must be another way to get in here. There must be like 20 girls over there, Fred said, pausing in his work yet again. That's so crazy. Was it worth the effort to get here? Eli asked with a broad smile. It would be if we could go look for some firewood over there, Marty grumbled. Nobody's going over there tonight, Eli declared. We can hike past and tip our hats in the morning. Eli couldn't keep Marty from fishing, though. After camp was set up, he made his way to the water's edge with his pole, accompanied by Nick, and the two of them pretended to fish for about half an hour, finally coming back when it got too dark to see. Man, they're all good looking, Marty declared when he and Nick came back over to camp. The rest of us were lounging around a campfire, swatting at mosquitoes. I assume you're not talking about fish, Dad said casually. How do you know they're good looking? Fred asked. You could barely see across the lake before it got dark. Well, I think they're all good looking, Marty huffed. Marty would be attracted to a rock if it had feminine tendencies, Eli grunted. When the laughter died down, Nick asked, Eli, did you really know there would be girls here, or were you just saying that to cheer us up? Eli scratched at a bug bite for a moment and tried to suppress a grin. Well, I think I'm going to hit the hay, he finally said. It's been a mighty long day. "Aw, come on, Eli," we groaned. "Did you know or not?" Nick asked again. "Good night, boys," Eli said. "Be sure to put out the fire." The next morning, we rose to a light morning mist and a chill in the air. We prepared our simple breakfast of instant oatmeal and hot chocolate and struck camp. It was approaching 9 a.m. when we packed up and headed for the far side of the lake. Marty could barely contain himself. "Do you think they're awake yet? How's my breath?" "Contain yourself, Marty," Dad groaned. When we reached the other side, we found to our amazement that in addition to several tents, there was also a number of horses staked out, grazing in the morning sun. A wide trail led to the water's edge. "I'll be darned. There's a superhighway on this side of the lake, and we crawled over 1,000,000 trees?" Fred growled when we neared the girls' camp. As we drew near, we could see a circle of girls and a few women sitting around a campfire next to one of the large wall tents. We stared at them, and they stared at us. Somewhere nearby, a horse snorted. "Morning," Eli called out in what he must have thought was a jaunty manner. I was surprised by the enthusiastic response. "Good morning," chorused the girls and women, bright smiles on their faces. I can't remember perfectly, but as I recall, there were actually about 20 girls, and they were good looking. Of course, this was years ago, so my memory may have recolored the picture, and in the mountains, I'm sure most girls would appear pretty good looking. We tried to look as natural and manly as we could, marching past those girls. Dad had to grab Marty's pack and steer him along. For his part, Marty was gripping his can of Axe as we passed. He gave the girls a little wave and as we headed up the trail, and I think one may have waved back. As we turned our backs on Lost Lake, Fred muttered beside me, "A whole mess of 'em. How did he know?" The horse trail back to the trucks was a dream compared to what we had traveled the day before, and even though it was longer, it was a much easier hike. I think most of the boys would agree it was worth climbing over all those trees, though. "Hey, Al, how much more of this do we have to do?" A voice cut through my personal reminiscing, and all of the sudden I was standing in the middle of a vast field of downed timber once again. "What's that?" I replied, giving myself a shake and looking around for the voice. "How many more of these dang logs do we have to climb over?" It was my cousin Cale, who was also working with me for Weed and Pest. About 100 yards to my right, his head and shoulders were visible over a massive fallen tree. Sweat had soaked through his hat and shirt, and a pained expression clouded his face. "Oh, I don't know," I sighed, pulling my phone from my pocket to look at the map of our area. "We have a ways left to go. We're almost there, though." "Well, whoever knocked down all these trees should get punched," Cale growled. "Agreed," I nodded warily. "What do you think is at the top of this?" Cale asked, looking up towards the end of our area. "Probably some rocks," I sniffed, then added under my breath, "There sure isn't a campsite full of girls." That would just be too good to be true. Well, there you have it, another untold tale from this side of nowhere. And I'll tell you that this experience really did occur. Troop 41 went on a hike. It was a hike preparing for a 50-miler, if my memory serves me right. And we did an overnight camp out at Lost Lake. And when we got to the trail, it was non-existent. And the day started out all right. We hiked this trail, but then we got to the point where we were crawling over all of these downed trees. And our scoutmaster, Wyatt Schatz, said, that there would be a bunch of girls at Lost Lake when we got there. And we all thought he was full of beans. But lo and behold, when we got to the lake, there was a big campsite full of girls camped on the other side. It was the darndest thing I've ever seen. So, yeah, the women of Lost Lake, too good to be true. But, yeah, if you have any stories about climbing over down timber to a mythical lake of, surrounded by women, then you can let me know. I'll be surprised if you have a story like this one. But, yeah, please be sure to like and subscribe. Give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcast. And we appreciate it. It makes the podcast easier to find for other people and helps us out. So, as always, this has been another untold tale from this side of nowhere, where we work twice as hard for half as much and still find time for the important things, like fishing. See you next time, folks.